Hey, welcome to the channel. It's Jack, the muscle and mobility maker with Stronghold Strength and Conditioning. And today, we're gonna be showing you how to clear that hip impingement that you've been struggling with every time you're in that deep squat position. But before we get into it, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Saturday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve aches and pains, prevent injuries, and overall optimize your performance inside the gym and outside of it in your daily life and routine. And it doesn't get better than that. So take advantage of it. Ready? Let's go ahead and dive into this one. All right, like I said, today we're gonna be showing you how to clear that hip impingement that you've been struggling with. And the very first thing to understand is that if this is a hip impingement, it's generally going to happen when your hip is in a deep flexion and maybe with a little bit slight internal rotation to the hip. This is how we're going to actually test that, and I'll show a quick example of the test to make sure that you can do that. But generally, if I'm lifting my leg or moving my leg and the hip is not in a deep flexion and I'm getting my pain at the soft tissues around, it's likely not a hip impingement and you got the wrong video. So we want to make sure that first of all that it is a hip impingement, and I will show you that test here in a second so that you can be sure that this is truly what you're dealing with. If not, you might have to look for something else where it could be more with your hip flexors that are causing the issues rather than the joint itself. Now the problem that we do run into with a hip impingement is in that deep flexion, the ball and socket of our femur is actually jamming up into that acetabular, which is what cups that ball and socket, the socket portion of it, and they're impinging or pinching those tissues at the front of the hip generally. And this is why we usually see it in people who are squatting at full depth, and that's where they're running into the problem. Now, in order to fully resolve this, we're going to take a mobility-based approach. We're going to address the joint first of all. We're going to look at the soft tissues around the joint, make sure that those are all squared away, and then we're going to stabilize the hip altogether so that you can make sure that this is something that's going to stick. Ready? Let's go ahead and start with the test, and we'll go to the mobilities from there. All right, first of all, to test, we're gonna lie back, roll the shoulder blades down and back, and then pull the knee into that deep flexion while adding a little bit of internal rotation. Now, if this recreates your pain, then this is likely a hip impingement that you are dealing with, and you can proceed forward from there. To begin, we wanna start by addressing the hip capsule itself. So we're gonna use a thick pull-up band to anchor around a post and place at the hip crease. Now the first one I want to do is extend away off the post using my free leg while I pull the knee into deep flexion and internal rotation. So yes, we are recreating our test here. Now I want to be careful as I gently pull myself into that position, and I want to allow the band to pull at the hip downward, creating space as that hip is working in flexion and internal rotation. Now I'm also going to add a passive half circle that I'm drawing at the top arc of my hip range. So I want to just kind of max out that hip range from the top, going from in to out as I draw that half circle here, and playing with those different positions as I feel the discomfort come into play. I'm going to allow myself to relax into those and settle into those a little bit longer and spend some more time in those positions. So we want to really allow the band to do its work pulling downward while I'm just taking it through ranges of motion that are challenged by that hip in the first place. I'm also going to add some active internal rotation here. So I want to make sure that I'm actively engaging my internal rotators. So I have my knee bent at 90 degrees about, keeping my hip in a flexed position, not as deep as when I'm pulling it in. I won't be able to hold it that high, but I do want to keep it up as I actively internally rotate. So I'm thinking of reaching my small toes toward the outside of my shin and rotating the hip in the socket. And you'll feel the hip toward the outside near maybe your pocket. That is where the work will be coming from. You might feel it wants to start to cramp a little bit. Just take your time. If it does start to cramp, actively flex into it rather than shying away from it. Next, we're going to turn over into a deep lunge position here, and I'm going to plant the foot and again take it into internal and external rotation while that band is pulling perpendicular to my hip. So we want to make sure that we have enough tension pulling perpendicular across that hip there, and I'm going to drive into internal rotation, open up into external rotation. Now the key here is that I'm maintaining my foot in position as I rotate. So I want to make sure that my foot's not leaving the floor in either direction as I internally rotate or externally rotate at the hip. And the last position we're going to play with here while the band is at the hip is a flexed internal rotation. So we're actually going into a position where the floor is going to help force us into that deeper flexion like a child's pose, and the band is going to pull into that position as well. I'm kind of flexing up against it at first and then sinking back in. And then I'm going to narrow my legs a little bit more into a more neutral position. And I'm going to do a little bit of a hip shift side to side as I play with how that band is pulling my hips deeper into flexion from the front there. So allow that band again to pull your hips in, settle in, and use that side to side rocking to gently test the range as you go from side to side at that top flexion. If you could settle in, take a little bit more room, okay? Next, what we want to do is address the soft tissues on both sides for internal and external rotation. Here I'm going to be using a loaded butterfly, so I'm taking 35-pound kettlebells here and setting them on the inner thigh while my butt is completely in the corner of the room. What I want to start with is a flex up against the weights and my hands, resisting myself, so it's an isometric flex so I could feel the muscles engaging against that load and against my resistance at my hands. When I hold that for 5 to 10 seconds, I'm going to release and allow the weights to open my legs a little bit further, so I'm getting deeper into that passive position. I'm going to repeat this process multiple times until my legs are able to open up wider and wider. Now, you might not get all the way to the floor in the beginning, but eventually this might be something that you can do as you build up to it. The reason we want to get these adductors to open up is to help your hip not get pulled into that internally rotated position in the bottom position of your squat. So we need to be able to open up as much external rotation as possible. And if those adductors are constantly resisting, then we're going to have issues where it will continue to pull us into a bad position and put excess pressure on those hips in that internally and flexed position. Next, we're going to stretch and strengthen those external rotators of the hips. So we want our shin to lie down at the edge of a bench. This is what I call a pigeon lunge. So we're doing a pigeon stretch, but adding a lunge to it so that we can activate those muscles that create external rotation and hip extension. And we're going to cue those as we flex the glutes at the top position and then allow them to stretch deeper in the bottom position. Very similar to what we were doing with the loaded butterfly here. This is loading those external rotators and taking them into a deeper range of motion, which is building strength through that full range as we work. Now we're going to do some reps here to begin with to open up that range first of all. And then once we feel like we could get to that floor pretty comfortably because we've opened up that range, you can kneel and then simply settle in for some passive range of motion as well. So here I want to lean over my belly button to my calf and allow that stretch to settle in at the hip for up to 2 minutes. The last thing we're gonna do is save that new range of motion and the new positioning of the hip that we opened up here. Now I'm using a band at the foot and ankle and the knees. The reason we want to do the foot and ankle is because a weak foot, a foot that collapses, can force your hip into internal rotation. And if internal rotation is causing our problem, we want to make sure our base is strong as well. So here, the band is around my toes, it's around my ankles together. This helps create a stable base. You can see my arch is very active there. And then the band above the knee is allowing me to activate and cue my hip external rotators in a deep squat position. So we're taking it right back to where the problem is, and we're going to solidify that with stability here with this banded position. Hold it for 60 seconds at a time, create a few sets, build as much range of motion as you can. All right, and there you have it, a simple mobility-based approach that you can take to help you fully clear and resolve your hip impingement. And if you like this video, make sure you let me know by clicking that big thumbs up down below and taking a moment to share this one with a friend who you know has issues with their hips as well. If they're getting that pinching feeling at the front when they're in their squat, there's a good chance, pass it along their way. Now, if you've been struggling with your hip impingement for a while now, or you have other unresolved training aches or injuries that you want direct help and guidance fully resolving, what I want you to do right now is drop down below in the description so that you can fill out a quick coaching application and schedule your mobility blueprint call. A mobility blueprint call is my opportunity to assess your missing range of motion and limited movement capacity right now, see where you're at, develop your blueprint program that's tailored to you to specifically address your mobility needs, and then from there answer any questions that you might have about online coaching and how it works. If that sounds good to you, drop down right now, fill out that coaching application, get it scheduled, and we'll get you headed in the right direction so that you can be training pain-free at the intensity that you want to. Last but not least, if you have not already, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Saturday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve aches and pains, prevent injuries, and overall optimize your performance inside the gym and outside of it in your daily life and routine, and it doesn't get better than that. Welcome to the Stronghold Army. We'll see you next week.